Hey guys, and welcome to another episode. I'm at Lake Gaston. We just had our practice day today, and it didn't go, I guess, as expected. We were hoping to find more bedding bass, but instead it actually, the fish were very scattered. We caught a lot of small fish, only a couple that were ones that we want to weigh in tomorrow kind of size. And so our plan is to focus on docks. We caught the majority of our fish off docks. We're going to fish laydowns, we're going to fish some stumps, and we're going to run around a lot, hoping that the big fish will bite tomorrow, because they certainly didn't bite today. Today we were fishing mostly shaky heads, jigs, and creature baits. Stay tuned. We'll make sure to let you know how we do, and wish us luck. We're sitting in 7th place overall in the Virginia Elite 70. So we really need to weigh in a good bag here.
Yeah.
Good morning, YouTube. Coming to you from Lake Gaston. It's currently 5 a.m. in the morning. I'm waiting for James to get here so that we can take off from another ramp, since the ramp we're going out of is pretty full. So, like I said yesterday, we're going to be targeting areas with a lot of docks, fishing shaky heads, jigs, and creature baits. Maybe mixing some topwater this morning as long as it's overcast. But wish us luck. Stay tuned, and let's catch them.
Approximately 10 hours later.
Welcome back. I am home from the Virginia Elite 70 tournament on Lake Gaston. It was an interesting event. I'm still working on getting out all the kinks and trying to figure out how I can put more film into my videos from the actual tournament. Carrying the camera is it's more work, and in the middle of a tournament you don't want to be fooling around with your camera equipment, especially when you're doing well in the tournament series and there's a lot on the line. Every bit of time you can put into the actual fishing part is crucial. So coming back from the tournament, I was pretty relieved in the fact that James fixed a winch issue that I had. What was happening was, for some reason, when you reeled in the winch to secure the boat to the trailer, it was actually going out of position and turning into the reverse reel out. And so I would start with a trailer that was locked down, and after a couple bumps, it would move from the tight position into the reverse. And so the front of my boat was bobbing with every single bump I hit, which when you're carrying a trailer, you want everything to be secure. Peace of mind is extremely critical. And getting that fixed was one last thing, one last distraction that I had to worry about. So, on to the event. The event was, I would say, not as good as the past couple events we've had. We never really locked on to any great pattern that was going to catch us big fish. And in fact, it ended up being a grinder tournament for everyone in the field. I think the weights were pretty darn tight. First place was one with, I think, 19 pounds, and then the second went down to 15. And we ended up finishing the event in 25th spot with just over 11 pounds. And between 13 pounds and I guess 11 pounds was extremely stacked. In fact, I think it was 12.8 that ended up being 12th place to get a check. So we were just over a pound out of getting a check for the third tournament in a row. It's very close. So the way the event went, our game plan was to hit a bed that James had found during the practice day. But getting to our first spot, even though we were boat 23 and had a really good boat draw, there was multiple other events going out from the opposite end of the lake where we ended up running to right near Pea Hill Creek. And so we got to our spot, and there was already 3 other boats in this one little cut. And one of the teams was fishing a bed that they had found. The other team was just fishing along the docks. And so we fished the docks for a little bit, but then we tried to go over to the other side where the grass bed was, where James had found that bedding fish. By the time we had gotten to where the bedding fish was, the bedding fish was no longer there. It wasn't that these other 2 teams had picked it off. In fact, just like our event on Kerr Lake, we ended up coming behind another boater. They never saw where that bed was. James had that bed found, and it was in a pretty tight spot along a grass line, just in the middle of the grass. And so we fished that grass line, got a couple small bites, had a couple followers, and by the time we got to where the bedding bass had been, it was no longer there. So we don't know whether another pleasure boater, another recreational angler from the day before had just gone in there, found this bedding bass, and caught it. That's what we assumed because it was no longer there. And so we left our first spot with 1 small keeper bass. I ended up breaking one of James' rods on a less than 6-inch bass. So at some point, I think James either stepped on the rod or a weight hit it really hard, and it had made for a weak area of the rod. And so I broke one of his rods. Sorry, James. And so we left our spot with 1 fish. We then headed to Pea Hill Creek, which historically, Pea Hill Creek is one of the best creeks for fishing for beds, and that's what James loves to do. And so we ended up running a stretch of docks that James had some history on, and I think we maybe caught 1 largemouth out of that area, but the spots were absolutely killing my shaky head, and they were right under the minimum length. So I think I caught a 12, caught a 13, caught a 13 and a half, but none of those bass reached the 14-inch line, which we needed. And so we ended up fishing another creek where James had located a bed, and he ended up catching the male off that bed. The female was considerably larger, but after he caught the male, that female would not stick on to the bed. She was roaming around, and after she came back a couple times, I think she was a little weary and kind of got out of there. And so we kept fishing that same little stretch of really shallow water, and he ended up finding another bed, and he was able to catch that fish. And so that, anytime you can find extra bedding fish when fish are bedding, that'll definitely help you out in filling out your limit, but also getting a little bit more size in those little spots that we were catching. And so he was fishing for this second fish that was located right inside of a dock area, and there was another dock that was to the left. And so I was able to get in front of James at the very front of the boat and start casting towards that other dock. And I ended up catching the second biggest fish that we ended up weighing in, skipping my bait underneath that dock. And so in one place, we had gone from 1 fish to 3 fish by the time we were done. And so we kept running around, and we ended up filling out our limit, but getting the big bite, something that you need when you're tournament bass fishing, it just never came. I ended up being able to upgrade our smallish fish 2 separate times, and they were not big upgrades by any means, but they were upgrades that ended up, as stacked as the field was, really helping us to still get where we needed to be to remain in points. And after the event, finishing in 25th place, we have now dropped from 7th to 9th. So we're still in the top 10, and I am completely stoked still to be in the top 10 for the first time fishing the Virginia Elite 70 series. So, looking back, what I was fishing during the actual tournament, I was fishing the jig. This is the Versace Craw Vanquish jig. Versace Craw is the color. And what I was throwing this on was 15-pound test fluorocarbon, Seagar, and Vizex. On the same rod that I'd fished in the past. This is a shorter rod that I use for a jig, but as I explained in previous videos, you're able to skip this around docks really easy because of its short length. And I had some fantastic practice at skipping jigs. I've never been really efficient at skipping jigs, but that's kind of a product of the majority of the places that I fish, whether it be the James especially, Potomac. You're fishing areas and they don't necessarily have docks. Lake Gaston, Smith Mountain Lake especially, they're dock lakes. They're commercial lakes, tourist lakes, and there's docks in every single little creek that you go into. So I was able to really focus on skipping the jig underneath the docks. I was getting a lot of bites on the jig in the practice day. But believe it or not, I don't think we weighed in a single fish on the jig during the actual tournament. What I was throwing was the Culprit Creature Craw. This is the 2.5 inch size. And the reason why I was throwing this is when you're skipping jigs under docks, you want something with a fat profile as far as the trailer goes. Flat and thick. And what that allows you to do is it allows the bait to skip really nice and easy underneath the docks. And I was able to get back to some of those bass in the practice day that were in the dark shade at the very backs of the docks. So fishing the Creature Craw by Culprit really helped. And what we were doing, like the previous tournament, is we were dyeing the tips of the appendages. And instead of going with orange as we were before for the early crawfish bite, we were dyeing them chartreuse to best imitate brim. The brim were up in the shallow waters. They weren't spawning yet, but we saw a ton of brim beds. And so we knew that bass were going to navigate to that area, but bass don't necessarily key in on that area until the brim are locked in on their beds. And just like the brim do during the bass spawn, they eat the eggs, they interrogate the bass, and it's kind of like payback for during the bass spawn. Another key for me, whether it be the jig or the shaky head, was using the Real Snot Ike-approved original formula. And what this allows you to do is it allows your cast to be longer. It decreases your line memory that you get, especially when you're fishing like a jig, where it's inevitable that you're going to backlash. And same thing with the shaky head, trying to get it back, skipping it under the dock as far as you could. That was crucial. And so the other bait that I threw a lot, it's what I was getting bit on during the actual tournament, was a shaky head. This right here is the Beast Coast Finicky Shake, and I was throwing it, pairing it with the Culprit T-Rex worm. This is the 6-inch model, and just like the jig trailer, I was also dyeing the end chartreuse to match the forage. And so I got a lot of bites on there. I was able to, like I said, upgrade us twice on the shaky head, but we just never got that one big bite that was going to take us way up the leaderboard. And that happens. You're not going to catch the big ones every time. 25th place, 9th overall in points now. Our next tournament is in June on the James River. The Bass Cat that we were luckily enough to use for the first 3 events has now been sold. And so we're going to have to fish out of my winner. The winner has never been in a tournament situation before. I've always used it as my practice boat and just pleasure fishing. And so there's a couple kinks that we got to work out. I found a few holes in the live well, which if there's holes in your live well, chances are it'll end up filling up with water in your battery compartment, So I'm not sure what I can do. I've tried to get it repaired in the past. It's a 1988 boat, so it's extremely old, and yeah, it's just what it is for a boat that old. I've also got to replace the lights for the front and the back, as you have to have your running lights for the beginning of the tournament in each of these events. A couple other kinks that I got to work out. James is a pretty good mechanic, so I trust that he'll be able to help out and to figure out these little things so we can have a boat that's going to run. It's lasted me every practice day with still plenty of battery to run, being on the trolling motor all day. So I'm not concerned in that scenario. Stick with us as we continue the Virginia Elite 70 series. Make sure to like and subscribe to that video. Put some comments down below to tell me what you think about these videos. And see you on the James River.